Welcome in, welcome in. This is the Champagne Room live, but we're actually recording this because I am joined today by Joey Linn of joeylinn.com, former Sports Illustrated writer covering the Clippers, and now former Illini Keaton Wagler. So, Joey, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man.
So, I think the Clippers have a large section, a large amount of new fans now with Illinois being a massive fan base, and now they're going to root on Keaton Wagler, one of the coolest stories, I think, objectively in college basketball last year. But real quick before we get into Keaton, just why the Clippers, if you don't mind me asking? Like, most people you hear about, oh, everything's Lakers out there. People don't care about the Clippers necessarily, but you said you've been covering them for a while. So what is it about the Clippers that have kept you covering and wanting to cover the team?
So I'm 26 years old. I was just growing up, in elementary school, middle school when Lob City was first kind of bursting onto the scene. So I always tell the story that was a rare time in basketball history where the Clippers were more exciting than the Lakers because that was kind of a rough patch for the Lakers, and that was a rare rough patch in Lakers history. But it just so happened to kind of coincide with the Clippers' ascension. And a kid growing up out in Southern California, I fell in love with Blake Griffin. He was the most exciting player I had ever seen in any sport. So that's my favorite player ever. Started watching him. He was drafted when I was 9 years old. So I grew up on him, grew up on Chris Paul, just grew up on Lob City. And then, when I was 18, 19 years old, I was playing a little bit of junior college baseball and was just kind of recognizing that my athletic days were probably coming to a close here in the next few years. So I wanted to stay around sports. And the way to do that was to kind of get into the media side of things, and didn't really know what that path was going to look like, but I had a passion for the Clippers. So I kind of started my own Instagram page, started just writing for anybody who would give me a chance, and slowly but surely built up a little bit of a following. And, now I guess call it 7, 8 years later, been covering the team since I was, like I said, 18, 19, but professionally since I was 21, which is when I joined Sports Illustrated. So I had a good 4 or 5 year run with them. And then now out on my own, start my own website and covering the team independently.
Yeah, so legit fan, local fan, and I love to hear why. I love to hear people's backstories because I know a lot of sometimes you just get placed random cities or whatever, but I like when somebody picks and chooses the team they're going to cover and they're passionate about it. But I got a handful of questions for you. This whole process with Keaton has been really intriguing to me, and now the summer league up and down has just made it even more of a story than I thought it would be. But first off, so the Clippers take Keaton Wagler 15th or 5th overall, excuse me, after a massive season in Illinois. What, I guess, amongst the fans, kind of what was the reaction, and what's sort of the vibe around Keaton, knowing that, okay, just 18 months ago, this kid was playing small high school basketball in Kansas?
Well, the Clippers were very open and honest about their thought process behind the pick. They think that by the time they get back to contender status, which the team admittedly is not right now for kind of the first time in a while, they're coming out and saying, hey, we're competitive, but we're not a contender yet. We're trying to get back there. For the first time since probably the Kawhi and PG era began, they're being honest about that. So they feel by the time they are back in that tier, whether it's 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, Keaton is going to be the best player of the group of guys they could have selected at 5. So Lawrence Frank came out and said, this wasn't about taking who's the best player today. It's about taking the best player for this franchise going forward once it returns to contender status. So that was very interesting of him to say. And, he kind of went through a little bit more of their thought process behind the Keaton pick, saying that obviously, the mental makeup is something that they want to invest in. Obviously, he has strides to make physically, but the Clippers believe that they have the facilities to help him do that. And they think that he will reach his physical potential. And they think once that kind of collides with, the basketball side of things, they see him as the right guy for this organization. Now, flipping over to kind of the fan side of things, which is funny that we, it is a worthy conversation to have, because obviously so much of the narrative when it comes to the draft, when it comes to summer league, is driven by fan discourse, for right or for wrong. It gets loud, and we know that's part of why we're here talking about this. So that is a little bit more interesting because we know in 2026, patience is not something that's very common among fans. So even with the Clippers coming out organizationally saying, hey, this is going to be a process, right? And that's intentional, but we believe that, it's going to result in the best player that this organization, could have gotten out of this draft. You're still going to have fans who overreact to, one summer league game, even a summer league quarter, right? Now the takes start flying. So hopefully that kind of reframes everything a little bit from my perspective, both from, kind of what I've seen up close, just from the way that fans have responded to the situation, but also just where the organization was coming from with that pick.
Yeah, it really feels like however you felt about Keaton going in, like if you were high on him after yesterday, you're like, oh, well, there it is. He's going to be a great player in this league. And then if you were low on him, you're like, well, that was just, a third quarter and he's got to sustain that overall. Yeah, it's just crazy Illinois didn't have many draft picks for a while. And now we've had a handful, and Keaton going 5th overall, the highest in 20 something years. Obviously the Clippers felt confident enough to put a lot of faith in him with that 5th overall pick. And what was it? What do you think it was specifically that? Because I think as Illinois fans, obviously we're kind of stuck in our own world. We know Keaton, we love Keaton, and pretty much everything about him. What was it specifically about Keaton that the Clippers felt confident? Okay, this is outside of the top 4. It felt like there was a clear top 4 in this draft. Like Keaton's gonna be the best player long term.
Yeah, for a lot of the reasons that I just said, particularly the mental makeup, they really like who he is as a person, and that almost kind of gets thrown around by fans in like a negative way, where it's people will say, oh, they drafted because of his character instead of his basketball ability. It's not instead of it's in complement to, and I think that's important to emphasize, because when you're talking, you mentioned that this is the highest pick that Illinois has had in a while. I mean, this is the highest pick that the Clippers have had since, speaking of Blake Griffin, since Blake Griffin in 2009 when he went, 1st overall. So this is kind of uncharted territory for this franchise and this regime between, Lawrence Frank and Ty Lue and Steve Ballmer. Like this is uncharted territory for them when you're talking top 5 pick. So they really wanted to get a potential franchise altering guy. And while, the Clippers have also said they really like a lot of these other players, they had a lot of them in their facility working out. I believe Flemings was a guy who even was in, Keaton's workout. Like there were a lot of guys that the Clippers liked and were high on. But when they look at the totality of who Keaton is as a player, as a person, and who they think he can become and who they can help him become, they truly believe that he is going to be the best of that group.
Yeah, and one of his best attributes at Illinois, and I think you even saw it now last night in the summer league, is that he would have a rough first half or even a rough game, and then he would respond the next game. And really, he became a player that you couldn't keep down. Like he would have a few bad shots. He might not even shoot the ball well or get beat on defense a couple times, but he'd never stayed down that low, which is crazy for a freshman to be like that. So yeah, I think even the mental makeup, I'm sure, can keep growing, and he can be even more ice cold. And one thing I've been interested to ask the last few days, ever since we communicated about talking, since you're in Vegas, you're around the summer league, why do you think it seems like there is such polarizing takes on Keaton both ways? And it really feels like there's been other players so far in the summer league that have struggled or haven't looked that great. Now, obviously, DeBonsa and Peterson are getting a lot of attention, and they put up a lot of buckets. But why do you think Keaton is so polarizing and has attracted such a spotlight? I think from Clippers fans, I think from a lot of people that, say they know basketball and stuff like that. But what is it about just this situation that has drawn such criticism and a lot of love?
Well, I'll give kind of a both sides answer to that question. So on one side, I say that I think it's just partly because of the lens that, we are viewing things through. We're looking at this so up close, and that just magnifies everything, because to the point that we've been making, this is a big deal for Illinois and their fans. It's a big deal for the Clippers and their fans. So there's a ton of investment from all sides. So everything's going to be magnified. Now, that's not downplaying your assessment because it's correct. He has been polarizing. There have been a lot of hot takes on both sides, but I do think it's magnified by just how closely we are looking at this. But the other side of it, I said, I had kind of two sides of this answer. The other side is that what you're seeing is true. There is a polarizing dynamic, and I think part of it is because the Clippers are historically fun to poke fun at. People love to, kind of kick the Clippers because they're the Clippers, even if they've been a completely different franchise since Ballmer took over than they were historically. I think that there's still kind of some residue, unfortunately, just in like the fan narrative realm of who the Clippers used to be in the past. So it's quote unquote funny to fans looking at the Clippers if they want to try to, declare that this pick was a bust, right? Like that's just always going to be kind of an uphill battle that the Clippers have to fight as an organization. And then I think also to your point about like the top four being consensus, no one's going to, even if the Bonsa struggles, like theoretically, no one's going to say that, Washington made the wrong pick because he was kind of the consensus 1-1 guy. Same goes for Peterson. Everybody knew he was probably going to. Same goes for Boozer and same goes for Wilson. So like there was never going to be a whole lot of spotlight or backlash on any of those picks because, they were the consensus guy at that spot. A lot of people were saying the draft starts at 5. So the Clippers got an opportunity to really take their pick of who they felt was going to be the best of that remaining group. So that puts an additional spotlight on this and inherently makes it more polarizing. So that's just my personal view. Everybody's going to have their own different opinion on that dynamic. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, one thing the NBA does really well, I don't know if any other league does as well, is the off-season drama, the summer league, because your team drafts a guy and then you get to see him like 2 weeks later. It feels like
365-day-a-year league, man.
Yeah, and sometimes the off-season stuff is just as fun or better than the regular season. But so from my take, obviously I'm going to be a little bit biased. I've tried to not be biased when I've watched these first two summer league games. It does seem like, okay, Keaton was a little timid at times, maybe kind of getting used to the game, which granted he did last year at Illinois. The first month or so, he really didn't play that much and play that big of a role. But it also feels like he's drawing double teams like through the pick and roll, and then he makes the right pass and feeds to an open guy, and that open guy either does the wrong thing or it kind of falls apart. Now, yes, he's gotten picked a few times and looked sloppy a few times, but it hasn't all been bad. Like even that first game, I felt like he was making the right reads a lot of times. But from your perspective, what has the experience of Keaton been sort of these first two games?
So I've said this a couple times. I do think it's both, to your point, just playing with summer league level talent and particularly summer league level bigs, because the Clippers summer league team in particular, they're missing Yannick Coden Niederhauser. That's a guy who was going to most likely be on the summer league roster and has a chance once he's healthy to maybe be the Clippers starting center. And then the guy that they drafted with their third pick, but second round pick, went back to Auburn. So like he was supposed to potentially be a guy on this roster as well that was just providing size. So I think they don't really have a true center on this roster. So there's like no gravity for the roll man at all, which is particularly tough on a guy like Keaton, who they're trapping him, out of ball screens and whatnot. So it's like there's definitely like he's kind of playing on like extreme difficulty in that regard. But to your point, like, there's been times where even when he's being guarded one-on-one, he's probably had to pick up his dribble, maybe a little bit earlier than you would like to see. He's probably had his back to the basket a little bit further out than you would like to see. I think part of that is the physicality, but I think also part of that too is just him not being as assertive as he can be. And he came out and said that himself after the first game, where he said, I got to handle the physicality better. I need to be more aggressive. And then we saw that in the second game, and it didn't always look pretty in the first half. Like it felt as if he was really trying to, kind of come out and set the tone, be more aggressive and kind of reverse some of the struggles that he had in game one. And at times that felt a little forced. then you really saw him catch that rhythm in the third quarter and figure out exactly, where his spots were going to be, reading the defense and picking his spots. So that's as good as anybody, having watched him last year, that's the kind of player that he is. He's going to feel out the game. He's going to let the game come to him. And I think that in itself is an appreciated attribute, because everybody wants to come, and see a guy, a top 5 pick, go put up 25 shots and, make 20 of them in a summer league game. And of course that's fun. And that can say a lot about a guy's talent. But when you talk about going to the NBA level and playing the type of role that Keaton is going to play on the Clippers, what's really important, and I think some of the attributes that he's already shown, even if they don't pop like some of the other guys that, we've seen in summer league.
So what are you hoping to see the rest of summer league, rest of the offseason before the season gets kicked off this fall? Like, what do you think Keaton needs to focus on? What do you think fans need to be like, okay, this is definitely a positive to see from Keaton before the season really gets rolling later this fall?
Well, he's only going to get stronger. We know that, right? That's going to be a huge emphasis. The Clippers are going to get him, on the right diet plan. They're going to get him, on the right, strength training plan, and he's going to be the best physical version of himself over time. That's going to take time, but that's probably already in the works right now organizationally. So that's going to come. In terms of what's going to translate day one, the shooting. We know that, right? Like, the shooting's going to translate day one. If you can shoot, you're going to get on the floor in the NBA. And he has already shown that that's not going anywhere. And I think that's going to especially help him play on this team, because while I think long term, you probably hope that, he's your one, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of off ball opportunities with this roster, having Garland already as your starting point guard. So Keaton's ability to provide space, Ty Lue will call it the 4-point line sometimes. He likes guys who can really stretch the floor and give a ton of space to everyone else to operate. He's going to provide that, right, when he's not on the ball. Then when he is on the ball, he's going to be playing with a lot better centers in the NBA than he is right now. Now, obviously, the Clippers, they kind of have a center problem right now. Brook Lopez is going to be coming back. He's prototypical role man. He likes to pop, and there's some value there as well. Or waiting for Yannick to come back. There's kind of a question mark on who the backup's going to be, but like, it's not far-fetched to say he'll be playing with better centers in the NBA than he is here in summer league. So all of that will be better for him once the season starts. Now, obviously, the competition's also going to be better. So it'd be remiss to not point that out, right? Like, defenders are going to be stronger. They're going to be more savvy. The game plan is going to be more dialed in. So that's going to be an adjustment as well. But in terms of the tools themselves, I'm not really worried about that translating to the NBA level, because I think he has a very NBA-ready game at this point.
So yeah, that kind of leads me into my next question, because I think, like most people, like people that are fair weather NBA or basketball fans, they don't know the ins and outs of the Clippers roster. So what is Keaton's role kind of expected to be this rookie season, and who's on the roster around him? I know a lot of people are talking about Darius Garland, and I would say even Illinois fans have kind of heard that name just because, like, oh, that's who he's going to be, placed next to. But what is Keaton's role going to look like, you think, this year one? And then what's it going to look like around him?
So I always kind of give the inside track to the incumbent players when we're talking about starting roles. And I think when it comes to the Clippers in particular, you have Chris Dunn, you have Derrick Jones Jr. Those are two guys who have been starting at that off-guard spot the last couple seasons now, particularly because of their defense. And, I think Keaton's shown some impressive defense during summer league, but, Chris Dunn's an all the caliber type guy who gives you a lot on that end. He can really help mitigate some of the issues that Darius Garland has defensively. He's a great point of attack guy. He's a good rebounder, for his size. I see him as having the inside track to that starting 2-guard spot. But I do think Keaton will have an opportunity to compete for it in training camp. Ty Lue is a guy who he loves having positional competitions in training camp. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity for Keaton to win that job, whether it be out of camp or at some point during the season. But he's going to play a lot. And I'll add one more kind of nugget to that. I'm going to ask this question at some point to Lawrence Frank, but in previous years, Lawrence has been very open about lineup decisions, minutes, rotations, all of that falling in Ty Lue's lane, He always says, that's a Ty Lue question. Organizationally, they don't overstep and tell Ty, hey, play this guy, do it this way. I'm curious, and I don't have the answer for you yet. I will have it at some point. You'll go to joeylinn.com and, we'll eventually have an answer for you. But I'm curious, because Keaton is the highest pick this organization has had since Blake Griffin, if there's going to be more of an organizational emphasis this season on his development as opposed to another rookie, right? Because you think about it, they have invested a ton in this pick. And while rookies historically across the NBA, but particularly on teams like the Clippers, who may not be a contender but are trying to compete for the playoffs, if they're struggling, they're going to sit, and a veteran's going to play over them. And I think in the case of Keaton, it would make a lot more sense in a year where you're not competing for a championship to allow him to work through the growing pains, play through the growing pains, not having to be looking over his shoulder and thinking, am I going to get pulled if I make a mistake? Like, I think that organizationally probably needs to be a little bit more of an emphasis with this pick in particular than we're used to seeing with rookies.
It reminds me of the NFL all the time, where you see, a guy get drafted high and then it's like, oh, are you going to start him? Or are you going to wait and start him later in the season? Even in LA, that happened with Jared Goff, right? With the Rams, and that ended up paying off. So, so do you think a successful season would be shows signs of development and maybe works his way into the starting lineup and builds strength? What's a tangible thing you think that would kind of be like, oh, that was a clear successful year one?
Yeah, I think that those tangible metrics, like you mentioned, just seeing that physical development and just the comfort at the NBA level, things that us as fans and observers can look at and see, he's come a long way from game one. Like, that's a win, right? Like, you don't want to put kind of like statistical goals out there because you don't know exactly the type of role that he's going to be playing. I think it's just a lot more about getting closer to the player that the Clippers envision him being on that next title contending team.
Yeah, just a couple more for you. The Kawhi situation, that's obviously up in the air, and I know you might not have black and white answers for me, but I think when Keaton got drafted, it was like, oh, sweet, that's going to be, he's going to be a bigger role on this team. So kind of what is the Kawhi factor of all this, and how might that affect Keaton's role?
Yeah, I don't think it'll affect it a ton in terms of like minutes and things of that nature, because to the point that I was just making, I think the organization is going to have like a level of intentionality to make sure that he's developing really in the best possible timeline that they can have. But what I think it will impact is just this team's expectations, right? Like, any Kawhi Leonard team expects to be competing for a championship. And if he's no longer around, I think that allows you even more to lean into internal development, maybe at the expense of chasing wins the same way that you would on a Kawhi team. Now, I don't want to be misquoted and make it sound as if the team is not going to be chasing wins this season, but there's a big difference between a team that wants to be competitive while also developing their guys internally than a team that has a tier one future first ballot Hall of Famer, near the tail end of his prime, that is chasing a championship. Like, those are two very different things. So I think with him now, on his way to Toronto, it will happen at some point. That kind of opens the door for the Clippers to be a little bit more, future minded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's why it was so intriguing, like the Kawhi situation, because it's like, it really just changes the trajectory of the Clippers. It seems like from the outside, like that's going to change how you maybe choose to develop a guy. But that's good to hear. Like, you think that they're probably they invested a lot in him. They're probably going to invest a lot in developing Keaton as well. And then lastly, this is more of a selfish question, just so I'm curious. I'm a big NBA fan. What do you think the Clippers outlook is for this season? What will fans see as a successful 2026, 2027?
Very similar to what you saw last year, very similar to what you saw in maybe 2021, 2022, that season, 2018-19. What all those years have in common is that the Clippers went into it with not a lot of expectations. They externally, they went into it with the outside narrative kind of being, this is a play-in team at best, and they overachieved. I think that's what you could probably expect this year. A team that, doesn't have super high outside expectations, but has high internal expectations. And that usually produces for some of the most fun Clippers seasons that I've been around.
Yeah, they definitely got talent, or they're gonna be interesting. They got pieces, and obviously, like I said, you're gonna have a lot of people in the state of Illinois tuning in to those late Pacific time zone games. But Joey, thanks so much for joining me. This has been awesome. I'm sure I'll reach back out at some point during the season. You probably have a lot of Illinois people reaching out, but real quick, can you, again, we talked about joeylinn.com, but feel free, plug your stuff. Where can people keep up with Keaton and the rest of the Clippers moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter at Joey Linn _ like you mentioned. I have my new website, joeylinn.com, and there'll be a ton there. I'll be talking to Keaton a lot throughout the year, both, exclusive interviews and post-game interviews. I post video, I post, articles all to the site. And you'll see a lot of that on social media as well. So, I pride myself on being at everything, being at every practice, being at every game, every shoot around, and making sure that I'm, giving fans as much potential information and content as I can. So, excited to have all the Illinois fans following along.
Yeah, no. And last question. It's about 93. It was like 93 here today. How hot is it out there?
It says 96 right now on my phone.
And it's what, 7:45, 96. That's
7:45 p.m. As you've actually seen the sun setting on me a little bit throughout this episode. The sun's going down, but the heat is not.
Hey, well, have fun out there. Thanks again, Joey. Appreciate it. And we'll talk in soon.
Yep. Take care, man. Thank you very much.